Political participation. It's one of those phrases we hear all the time, and we all kind of nod along like we know exactly what it means. But what if I told you that the concept is way bigger, way more complicated, and honestly, way more fascinating than you might think?
So let me ask you, right now, when you hear that phrase, political participation, what's the very first image that pops into your head? For most of us, I'm willing to bet it's voting. Heading to the polls, filling out a ballot. And look, that is absolutely a huge part of the story. But it's really just the tip of a very, very big iceberg.
So, here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with the basic definition of political participation. Then, we'll look way beyond the ballot box. We're going to dive into what actually drives people to participate, see how it looks totally different depending on the political system you're in, and then we'll wrap up by tackling the challenges it's facing in our world right now.
All right, let's get into it. First things first, let's build our foundation. What are we really talking about when we use this phrase, political participation?
Okay, so this is a classic academic definition, but let's break it down. It really highlights two crucial goals. The first one is the obvious one, influencing the selection of officials. Who gets elected. But the second part is just as important, maybe even more so, swaying their decisions after they get into office. See, it's not just about winning an election, it's about what happens next. It's about shaping policy. Now that we've got that core idea locked in, let's start to really broaden our view and explore the huge world of participation that exists way beyond just casting a vote.
And this is so important to remember. The ways we can participate today weren't just given to us. They were fought for, hard, for centuries, piece by piece. This has been a long, slow grind. From the Magna Carta starting to chip away at the absolute power of a king, all the way to huge victories like women's suffrage in New Zealand and the Voting Rights Act in the US. Every single one of these steps, slowly, painfully, expanded who gets to have a say.
So participation really breaks down into two main flavors, direct and indirect. Direct participation is when you, the citizen, get to vote on a policy yourself. Think of referendums or ballot initiatives. But indirect is what most of us are more familiar with. You elect someone to make decisions for you, and then you try to influence them through things like emails, phone calls, or campaign donations.
But this brings us to a really critical dividing line. Because, let's be honest, participation isn't always a force for good. There are legitimate forms, things like voting, peaceful protests, that actually strengthen a democracy. And then, there are illegitimate forms. We're talking about political violence, voter intimidation, fraud. These things actively try to corrupt and destroy the system from within. The goal might still be influence, but the methods are just toxic.
And the spectrum of what actually counts as participation? It is incredibly wide. It can be expressive, like showing up to a rally, or even just wearing a t-shirt with a political message. It can be super active, like volunteering for a campaign or even running for office yourself. And get this, it can even be passive. Some scholars actually argue that just making the effort to stay informed makes you a kind of armchair citizen. Then, of course, there's instrumental participation, like lobbying to get a law passed that benefits your business. It's a huge range.
Okay, so we've covered the what and the how. But now let's get to the really interesting part. The why. What is it that actually motivates one person to jump into the political arena while someone else decides to sit on the sidelines?
A huge piece of this puzzle is what's going on inside our own heads. It's about our psychology, what we believe about the world, and even our own personalities.
This all boils down to a core psychological idea called efficacy. And all that really means is your personal belief that you can actually make a difference. It's that raw energy that fueled grassroots movements like the Key Party on the right or Occupy Wall Street on the left, groups of people who truly believe they could shake things up. And it makes sense, right? If you don't think you can change anything, why would you even bother to try?
But of course, it's not all just in our heads. The world around us, our education, how much money we make, the community we live in, all of that plays a massive role in whether we can or even want to participate.
When you dig into the data, a few things really jump out. Education level is one of the single best predictors of whether someone will participate. Income is another big one. It's pretty hard to find time to volunteer for a campaign if you're working 3 jobs just to make ends meet. And sometimes, a shared economic struggle can become an incredibly powerful motivator, like we saw with Brazil's landless workers movement.
All right, now we're going to zoom out, like way out to the biggest picture possible. Because all these different forms and drivers of participation, they don't happen in a vacuum. The type of political system you live under completely changes the rules of the game.
And wow, the contrast could not be more dramatic. In a democracy, your rights are protected by law, elections are supposed to be free and fair, and the media is independent. But shift over to an authoritarian system, and suddenly those rights are restricted, any dissent is crushed, and the media is just a mouthpiece for the state. Then you get to a totalitarian regime, and it's taken to the absolute extreme. Your rights are gone, totally swallowed up by the state. And what they call participation is really just a forced performance of loyalty.
And this leads to this really fascinating and frankly pretty chilling idea: tutored and coerced participation. In these authoritarian and totalitarian systems, you might actually be forced to participate. Think about being required to show up at a state-run rally, or being put through indoctrination programs like China's patriotic education. It looks like participation on the surface, but it's not a free choice at all. It's a demand for absolute loyalty.
So let's bring it all back home, to the here and now. Because even in established democracies, meaningful political participation is facing some really serious headwinds.
Just look at this number. In a country like the United States, a place that prides itself on its democratic traditions, voter turnout in major elections often doesn't even break 60%. That means 2 out of every 5 eligible voters are just staying home. That's not just a statistic. That's a huge warning sign of widespread disengagement.
So what is going on? Well, it's a perfect storm, really. You've got this growing distrust in politicians and political institutions. There's a widespread feeling that big money has completely drowned out the voice of the average person. You add in those real economic barriers we talked about, a decline in civics education, and a political conversation that has become so angry and polarized that a lot of people just want to tune it all out.
So, we've seen that participation is so much more than just voting, right? It's this constant, ongoing effort to influence what happens in our world. It's a whole set of rights that people fought and died for over centuries. And today, it's facing some of its biggest challenges yet. Which really leaves us with one final big question. A question for you. In this world of digital noise and deep divisions, what does meaningful participation actually look like?